Yes, my name is Kathy Bratton. I am the marketing coordinator here at Wessler, and I'd like to make sure that everyone can hear me. So I have a quick question for you. If you could just input your answer in the chat box. I'm just wanting to know how many of you are viewing this webinar. Basically, I know some of you are in a conference room and just wondered if you're viewing this webinar by yourself or if you have other people with you. If so, if you could just enter in the chat box the number of people that you have with you, I can then see that everybody can hear me. Great, glad, thanks. Thanks for doing that, and I'm glad everyone can hear me just fine. I'm glad you joined us, and we have a great presentation today on managing your drinking water wells and preventing contamination in the wellhead protection area, presented by Mary Atkins. Mary's our environmental scientist, project manager, and head of our environmental group with more than 10 years experience. We encourage you to ask questions, and we'll address those questions at the end of the webinar. Please use the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks for everyone for joining us. We are going to be talking about wellhead protection today and training for utility employees. I wanted to start by mentioning that the goal is that this presentation would act as your periodic training that's required in your wellhead protection plan. So for record-keeping purposes, if there's more than one of you listening and viewing, then you should have a sign-in sheet. Have everyone print their name and sign their name and then include the date. And then also, if you want to print a copy of the confirmation email from when you signed up, that would be record that you signed up for the webinar. And then the email that went out that kind of described what the content of the webinar was should act as a summary of what was included in the training. So that kind of documentation should be held on to in case a regulator wants to see documentation of your training. So let's get started. There we go. So the presentation is going to talk about wells and groundwater protection, wellhead protection overview, managing your setback areas, preventing and cleaning up spills, and then contingency planning. So let's talk about wells. These are a couple of pictures of some municipal production wells. They might look similar to wells that you have in your utility. This is a diagram that kind of shows how a well is constructed and how it is drilled down into an aquifer where the fresh water is drawn from below the surface. Sometimes wells can be shallow or they can be deep. The wells can be maybe 50 feet deep or 100 feet deep or 300 feet deep. It all just depends on the depth of where that fresh water is down in the aquifer that you're trying to pump out of. And one thing that I did want to talk about is confined versus unconfined aquifers, and then the clay layer that is between the surface and where the aquifer is located. The clay layer is kind of important with contamination or spills or any activities that happen on the land surface that could impact the soil. If there's a clay layer of soil between the surface and the aquifer, then that helps act as a barrier. And in those situations, you would have a confined aquifer where it's kind of isolated from the surface. And then there may be other situations where there's an unconfined aquifer where the water is more susceptible to surface contamination. So this is a slide that shows your a typical wellhead protection area. There's an aerial photo, and the wells are kind of located down here in the middle. The dark circles represent the wells. There's two wells, well number 1 and well number 2. The circles directly around the wells represent the sanitary setback. And then you have a 1-year, a 5-year, and a 10-year time of travel. And those are all part of your wellhead protection delineation. There was a hydrogeologic study done to delineate these areas, and it shows where the water from the aquifer is being drawn into those wells. And this is the area that needs to be protected. So let's talk about the importance of groundwater protection. As I mentioned, the activities that happen on the land surface can impact the ground and then the water and the soil underneath. So if there are impacts to the groundwater or the soil, it can migrate down into your groundwater. So the 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year times of travel are important areas to focus on with your wellhead protection efforts. The 1 year time of travel represents if a point of contamination lands within that area, it would take 1 year to travel to the wells, and then the same with the 5 year and the 10 year. So your wellhead protection planning is kind of looking at either a 5 year or a 10-year scope as to how you're going to be managing those areas and how quickly contamination might travel to your wells. Any small amount of contamination can have a big impact on a drinking water source and can make it unsafe. So treatment can also be very difficult once an underground aquifer is contaminated. So it's important to protect the groundwater surface so that you don't have to deal with public health issues. So this is a zoom in of the wellhead protection area that I showed previously, and we want to focus on the sanitary setbacks. So we're looking at this area right around the wells in both of these situations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Your sanitary setback is a radius around your wells, and it's either 100 feet or 200 feet. So check your wellhead protection plan to see what the radius is that's designated in your plan. There's different reasons why you might do a 100-foot or a 200-foot, kind of depending on if you have a confined or an unconfined aquifer, whether you're doing automatic disinfection in your treatment system, and then whether there's a potential for direct contamination based on different activities. So the sanitary setback area has very specific requirements because of the potential for direct contamination. If there was a spill that happened right near your wells and your wells were turned on, it could pump contamination directly into your water system. So this is an area that has to be managed specifically. So as we talk about your sanitary setback areas, I wanted you to think about the following questions. What is located within the sanitary setback radius? Are there other buildings? Are there roads, railroads? What are the activities that are being conducted in that area? Are they doing lawn maintenance? Are there farmers that are doing some of their plowing or seeding in those areas? Who owns the property? Sometimes wells are placed on properties that are not owned by the utility. And what are the challenges in trying to deal with different property owners? And then who has access to the property? All of your wells need to be secure and from unauthorized access. So that's another issue to think about around your wells. This is a picture to try to get you thinking about some of the activities that might be happening around your wells. This is a well. It's enclosed because it's basically open to the public. There's a business over here. There's a road passing right near the wells, definitely within 100 or 200 feet of the wells. Across the street is another business. There's grass around the well that needs to be mowed. Maybe there's a residential property near this well. And what are the security issues? Who has access to this site? So let's first talk about chemical usage within the setback area. All chemicals need to be restricted. So no chemicals should be used, applied, mixed, stored, or transported within your sanitary setback area. Now you can use the chemicals that are used for water treatment. In many cases you do have water treatment chemicals near your wells. So that's appropriate. But thinking about some of the other chemicals, are you using chemicals? Are you applying fertilizers or pesticides or mixing, doing any kind of mixing, any storage, or the transported could be transferring a chemical from one container to another. All of these kinds of things should not be done within 100 or 200 feet of your wells. If you do have anyone doing lawn maintenance in the area, Make sure that they are educated on the refueling or repair of any of that equipment. If there's a mower or a weed eater that needs refueling, it should be taken outside of the sanitary setback to transfer fuel into those pieces of equipment. Just because the likelihood of having a spill, you want to kind of eliminate that issue. And then something else to think about is de-icing. If usually there's an access road to your well, or there may even be some sort of a road next to your well that in the winter you need to do some sort of de-icing with salts or liquid de-icers. If you can use mechanical clearing methods, that is the best option. Obviously, you want to take into consideration the safety issues with ice and try to maybe apply lightly if not at all. But do your best to try to control those types of situations. So preventing and cleaning up spills within your sanitary setback. If you're going out to your wells to check on the wells, you're likely taking a utility vehicle, and you want to make sure that those vehicles are not leaking. So check those vehicles periodically, make sure they're not leaking. If you do have a leaking vehicle, don't take it near your wells. Don't park it near your wells. Any of the equipment that's located near your wells, make sure that that is not leaking. If there are leaks, you should place drip pans under the leaks to catch the spills, or some sort of an absorbent spill pad might be useful to help collect those spills. You should always clean up spills with dry methods. So absorbing a spill or using oil dry, the granular absorbent is a good option. You should never spray a spill with water to try to wash it off. And if you do have a spill that's puddling, sometimes a boom can be used. They have absorbent booms that can provide a barrier to help control a spill and prevent it from moving. You also never want to allow a spill to soak into the ground, especially in your sanitary setback area. That is the major issue. So if you do have soil impacts, you want to make sure and dig up those spills, dig up the soil, and if you have a gravel surface where a spill has occurred, the rock that has been spilled on needs to be removed and taken out, just so that spilled material does not migrate down into the ground. One option that you may consider is having a spill kit on hand, maybe in your vehicle, or if you have a well house or some sort of a water treatment plant near your well, some sort of a structure where you can keep a spill kit so that it's on hand to address spills as they happen. Now this slide kind of shows you an example of a spill kit. The yellow bucket in the back is a spill kit, and this is an example of an employee trying to clean up a spill. You can see there's this red drum, and maybe it's been leaking, and so they've placed some booms around the spill, and they're trying to absorb it with some spill pads, and they're putting it into a trash bag for proper disposal. So this just gives you an idea of the proper cleanup methods for spills. So then let's talk about drainage within your setback area. You should do periodic inspections of your setback areas to look for the drainage patterns. The drainage in your setback area should always flow away from your wells. This is where a spill would flow. So if there is a spill, you want it flowing away from your wells and not towards your wells. A good way to check on this is during a rain event. When it's raining, go out to your wells and take a look at where the water is flowing. And this gives you a good idea of where stormwater might be ponding or where it might be flowing. You should also check the adjacent properties, the properties that are around the wells, to check for on-flow. So the drainage from another property might be coming towards your wells. And if you can redirect those flows or route them around your wells so that they're not flowing towards, that is the best situation. You should always inspect after a rain event to look where the water is ponding. If there's ponding water, that's not a good situation. You want to try to regrade those areas so that those little pockets of ponding water don't sit, because then they'll eventually soak into the ground. You should try to make record of those inspections because it's required by the Wellhead Protection Plan to inspect. So if you can make record of that and then develop a plan to correct the drainage issues. Well security is important. That's our next topic. Your well should always remain secure. So every well has a little bit of a different situation. Your well may be located inside of a well house, and in that case, the door should be locked. There may be access gates if there's a drive. You want to try to limit access if possible and lock any gates. You want to lock all of your control panels. This might be with a padlock or some other form of locking access to those panels. Any access hatches should be locked, and then any fence enclosures should also be locked. You should perform routine security checks. Daily security checks are probably the best way to go. If you have a remote well that's not nearby, those are the ones that you may want to check on a little more frequently. They might be susceptible to vandalism or people trying to gain access to them. If you can get in touch with your police department to let them know where the wells are and your security concerns, that they can check those when they're on their regular police patrols just to keep an eye on the wells. And then also if you have a SCADA system or some sort of a remote monitoring for your well area, those systems could send a signal if there was a door open or a control panel was opened or an access hatch. If you have a way to do that kind of monitoring, that can be helpful as well. So investigating and reporting suspicious activity is one of the most important steps in the well security. If you notice that someone has gained access or it appears that someone is wandering around the wells, it doesn't seem like they should be there, that should be investigated. So here's just a couple pictures to talk about well security. This first is a well house. There's a door, there's a lock on that door. This here is a monitoring well. This blue well with a padlock on it, so that one is secure. This is an instance where the utility owns a plot of land where the water tower is located and there's a well on this property, so it's completely enclosed by a fence, and this gate is locked. And then this is another situation where the well is completely enclosed along the top. There's a doorway to enter that's locked. The control panels are on the inside, and then the well pump and everything here is located inside. So this is a pretty secure situation. So going back to our wellhead protection area, we now want to talk about contingency planning. So in the event that there is a spill or some sort of a contamination, what are the steps that we need to take to address those issues? So thinking about this wellhead protection area and what are the steps that we need to take. So let's first talk about the types of emergencies that could impact your wells or your water distribution system. So as we're going through these, I want you to start to think about how you might respond to these in your well system and in your distribution system. So transportation-related spills, this might be a car accident or a tanker truck that has spilled, or it might even be a transportation route, could be a railroad or some sort of a rail yard. Think about those kind of instances. The next one is for spills in agricultural areas. If your well is in a remote area, maybe there's agricultural fields. There are times of the year where chemicals are being applied to agricultural fields, and there could be a spill, so wanting to try to keep track of those. Gas stations, obviously, in areas where fueling is occurring, those are areas that a spill could happen. It could be an emergency situation. Industrial spills, this is one that was kind of in the news recently. I believe it was in West Virginia. There was an industry that had spilled and it went into a river, and it happened to be a surface water situation where they were pulling water from a surface water, and it caused some big problems within a drinking water system where they likely had to implement their contingency plan. So thinking about the industries in your area and what types of spills might happen to be prepared for those. Underground and above ground storage tanks, those could rupture or they could leak, which could cause an emergency situation. Power outages, that could affect your equipment in your utility, and then fires or explosions, and then natural disasters. So we're going to kind of go through each of these fairly briefly, just to kind of go through the steps. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to first talk about the contingency plan in general. So your contingency plan in those emergency situations help you to decide what is it that we need to do in the event of a spill or contamination, who needs to be contacted, and then what steps do we need to take to address these issues. So in your contingency plan, there should be available copies of this plan. Now, your contingency plan might be located as a chapter in your wellhead plan, or it may be a separate document. So locate that document and make sure that there's a copy of it at your water plant so that there's easy reference to grab that and take a look at it if you need to. You should also distribute copies to those emergency responders. So those who might be responding to emergencies would need to know who to contact at the utility and what your steps are that you'll be taking. So think about your fire departments, your police departments, the county emergency management agency, and then even the county health department. Think also about sometimes your wellhead protection area is outside of a town limit, and there may be more than one fire department or police department or even a sheriff's department that might be responding to spills in that area. So make sure you think about all the responders who might be responding and make sure that they're aware. The contingency plan needs to be reviewed by all of the utility employees and then also the emergency responders. So in your contingency plan is also a list of contacts. This contact list is a quick reference that has utility contact information, who to contact at the utility in case there's an emergency. And then even after hours contact information is important. So what if there's a spill or a disaster that happens on a holiday or over the weekends? How can the emergency responders get in touch with employees at the utility? The contact list should also have local, county, state, and federal responders and phone numbers so that they can easily be contacted. And then cleanup companies. If there is a spill that happens, you may need to contract with someone to help clean up the spill, and having a quick reference so that they can get deployed and come out to the site to assist. So this contact list should be posted at your water plant in a location that can easily be referenced. Other information that's included in your contingency plan is news media contacts. So this is useful if you need to put out a boil order or if you need to let the general public know that they should not be drinking the water, that it is unsafe. You would want to get that information out through local radio stations, television stations, newspapers. So having the contact information for those entities available as a quick reference is important. Your contingency plan should also have a list of sensitive customers. So aside from just putting out a general boil order, there may be customers that need to be contacted specifically. So you want to think about nursing homes, maybe retirement communities where people are living that may be very susceptible to the water, and they may need a personal phone call or a personal site visit to make sure that they understand the situation with the drinking water. Think about your child care centers, child care facilities, medical facilities, and schools. Those are some examples of sensitive customers. Your contingency plan also has a list of alternate water sources. So if you cannot use your water system in your water source, what are some of the nearby water utilities that you could turn to? Do you have any existing connections with other water utilities? This should all be explained in your contingency plan. And then are there bottled water sources nearby that could generate water and bring it to your site? In the instance that you do have a nearby water utility that can supply additional water, you may need water haulers who can bring the water. So having a list of local water haulers that can be called in the event of an emergency. So let's talk in general about spills within the wellhead protection area and kind of how you should react to those. Any spill within the wellhead protection area needs to be reported to the water utility as soon as possible so that the spills can be cleaned up and that the water utility can investigate those spills to make sure that they're not impacting any part of the groundwater source or any of your wells or anything in your water distribution system. So when these spills do happen, you want to make these communications and start to assess the situation. And then when it's required, you want to also get in touch with these hazardous material contractors that we talked about before to assist in the cleanup. So now we're going to talk about those emergency scenarios. And as we kind of go through these, I wanted to just have you think about what it is that you would be doing in the event that you had one of these scenarios. So the first one is a power outage, then a mechanical failure, a distribution system leak or failure, a fire explosion or a natural disaster, and then a spill. And every situation is a little bit different, so just think about these in general. So if there was a power outage at your well, if you go to your well and you notice that the power is out, you want to notify your supervisor and then check for an alternate power source, or maybe an emergency generator needs to be turned on. You want to monitor your wells to make sure that they're working properly, and then turn to additional wells. If there is a well that cannot be used, is there another well that can be turned on to help meet the supply? The electric company might need to be contacted if it's a situation associated with their utility, and then conduct the repairs if necessary and get your well back in service. A mechanical failure at your well. So this might be a pump that has gone out. You want to notify your supervisor and then check for leaks and try to control those leaks. Remember the sanitary setback area. You want to clean up those leaks immediately. So you want to also look for backup power. That may be the reason for the failure. You may need to turn that on, the backup power. You may also need to turn to additional wells if you have a well that's down completely and it needs to be repaired. So conduct your repairs and then contact a maintenance contractor if necessary to help with that. When you have a leak or a failure in your distribution system, you want to notify your supervisor and then close off appropriate valves to try to isolate the problem. You might turn off an affected well if necessary and then start to conduct your repairs. When you are doing the repair, be aware of spill prevention during that time. If there is a spill, if you've brought in equipment to help with a repair, you want to clean up any kind of a spill that happens during that time. And then you want to return your wells to service and get your system going again. If you did lose positive pressure, the main would need to be flushed and the bacteriological samples would need to be taken. So in the event of a fire, explosion, or other disaster, you want to move to a safe location and then warn others in the area of the issue. You want to notify the fire department so they can assist, and then notify your supervisor. If there is an affected well or effect in the water system, you want to assess that. You want to isolate the contamination by shutting valves. And then do not enter the affected area until directed to do so by emergency responders. They can assess the situation and let you know when you can return. Once you can return, you want to assess the damage and then go through some of the steps that we talked about previously. If you do have an uncontrolled spill, you want to move to a safe location and then notify the fire department. They can come in and help to control a spill. Notify your supervisor, and then do some of the same steps as we talked about before. Assess whether the spill has affected the water distribution system or the wells. You may need to isolate parts of your system to make sure that the contamination doesn't spread. And then if the spill is within your setback area, you want to turn off the wells so that the soil doesn't start to pump some of that contamination directly into your wells. And do not return the well to service until it's determined that that spill has been completely cleaned up and that the threat to the water system has been eliminated. So in conclusion, I just wanted to wrap up and talk about the importance of wellhead protection. It's an important plan that you have in place to protect your groundwater source and to keep the area safe. And then the contingency planning is important for the utility to make them aware of what do we do in the event of a spill, and the training exercises like this that go on just to help remind you and help you think about what are the situations so when they happen you can be prepared. So at this time, we're ready to take questions if you had any questions, and my contact information is here. So Kathy, did you want to, do we have any questions?
Yes, thanks Mary for a great presentation, and we do have some questions coming in, and feel free to type those questions as we continue. Paul has a question. He wants to know, can you explain what is in a spill kit and where can I get one?
Oh yes, this is a good question. So the spill kit, which I talked about previously, this is a, you can kind of put it together yourself, or there are companies that make these spill kits that you can purchase them. Usually they have gloves and trash bags and absorbent materials. They may have absorbent pads, or they may have some of that kitty litter or that oil dry in them. Just it's a kit that is there and it's ready to go to it and use it to help to clean up a spill. It should have everything in it that you might need to clean up a spill, and they can be purchased or you can put them together yourself.
Okay, and Amy says that she commented that spill kits, New Pig, Dog, Lab Safety, or Granger for some examples. Yes, Mary, do you know what that's referring to?
Yes, those are, I think those are some of the companies that do provide spill kits. So yes, thank you for giving some of those names.
Okay, thanks Amy. Another question from James is this worth any CEU?
Oh, I apologize. We did not get CEUs for this. It was going to be kind of a short presentation, so we did not apply for the CEUs.
Okay, and another question is the wells are very deep, so how will the chemical affect it?
Well, if you do have deep wells, that's a very good question. A lot of times there's less of an issue with contamination near the wells if your wells are very deep, and if you have a good clay layer between where the surface is and where your aquifer is located. So yes, deep wells are usually less susceptible to contamination. So the shallower wells are a little more susceptible within that setback area, and the deeper wells, usually the contamination kind of goes into the soil and then it gets stuck at those clay layers and doesn't migrate any further. That was a good question.
Okay, another question. You touched this. When there is a spill within wellhead protection area, what do utilities need to do? Contacting IDEM, doing cleaning.
So I think the question is asking when do you contact IDEM, and there's different situations. I think whenever a spill cannot be controlled and it has left the site, and especially if it has entered a waterway or if it has entered a storm sewer and it's traveling, then that is when IDEM needs to be contacted, and they can come in and help direct the cleanup and assist. So there is a 24-hour spill hotline for IDEM, and those types of phone numbers should be kept in your contingency plan on the contact sheet, so that when you do need to contact them, you have that information at hand.
Okay, Rick wants to know, how is new construction limited, or is it within the 1 to 10 year limited areas?
That's a good question. The Wellhead Protection Plan and the regulation does not provide any restrictions on construction. Now, there are some other rules about, I think, like landfills can't go into a wellhead protection area, or some of the underground storage tank rules have some requirements that the underground tanks have to have leak detection and they have to be constructed a certain way. So there are existing regulations for some situations, but not all situations. So the Wellhead Protection Program allows the local entities to kind of regulate those areas through ordinances. So if your area is within the boundaries of a community, you can set an ordinance that would restrict certain activities. And it's a very good idea to set up an ordinance for your setback area to say within this 100 feet or 200 feet of these wells, you cannot construct. We need to keep this area clear, you know, to kind of develop an ordinance language so that then the town can have local authority to restrict that as construction comes in. Now, there's also a complication when your area is not within a town or you don't have jurisdiction on your entire wellhead area. It might be out in a county. And so in that instance, county planning departments may need to be contacted, or zoning areas need to, maybe a wellhead protection area needs to be added to a zoning map so that the county is then aware of where those areas are, so that when they're approving development, that can be accounted for. It's pretty flexible, and there's a lot of different ways to handle that, but that's a very good question.
Okay, Max wants to know, what are the spill reporting limits for petroleum in wellhead protection areas?
That is not part of the wellhead protection rule. That would be, I think there's an Indiana spill rule that whatever the other regulations are for the amount of fuel that's spilled before it's reportable would apply within a wellhead protection area. There's no stricter requirement, I don't believe, for wellhead protection areas.
Is any specific engineering rule / formula needed to apply for installation of a well?
Yes. I think that you're probably asking about construction of a new well. With production wells, with utility wells, those obviously there's an entire process. You go through IDEM for approval, and then the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, they approve high-capacity wells. Now, with private wells and maybe wells in industrial areas, I am not exactly sure of the process on how they get approval to drill wells. I think that's a little beyond. I would have to do some research and look at what your specific comment is or your specific situation. We might be able to help answer your question. If you want to contact me specifically about that, we can talk a little more.
Okay, what 1 year, 5 year, and 10 years time of travel used for?
Yes, those are required by the Wellhead Protection Plan to delineate those areas, and those are now your wellhead protection areas. So you, the 1 year time of travel is an area where if a point of contamination falls within that area, it would take a year to travel to the well, and then 5 years and 10 years. And so those are required by the wellhead protection rule to have those areas delineated so that you know where it is that you're supposed to be protecting your groundwater source. Those areas represent where the groundwater is pulling from underneath the surface. So spills that happen on the surface would migrate down and potentially enter the aquifer and be pulled towards your wells. So I think that maybe helps answer your question about what is a 1 year, 5 year, and 10 year time of travel.
Okay, Rick has a specific question. Or specifically, can you have a detention basin within those areas? Should it be or have pretreatment?
Yes, that's a good question. There is a regulation. It's Rule 13, 327 IAC 15-13 for MS4 areas. And in that regulation, you cannot have infiltration practices. Your detention pond could not infiltrate into the ground in those areas. There would have to be some sort of a pipe that releases the water. It can't just hold it and let it infiltrate into the ground, that you would want to be releasing the water. But yes, it's a very good idea to have pretreatment prior to a detention pond, because the water kind of sits in those areas, and if there's contamination running off of a parking lot or whatever upstream area of that pond, it then enters the pond, and then it's kind of sitting in that pond, and it could migrate down into the ground. So setting up a local ordinance that requires that is a very good idea. And for those communities that are regulated by the MS4 program would be required to have some sort of pre-treatment for the water quality.
Ryan wants to know, what do we do when we have chemicals and oil stored within our well setback area and it is not feasible to store those chemicals elsewhere?
That is a very good question, too, and that does happen from time to time. Obviously, you want to look at all the options. How can you put these chemicals somewhere else? And even your water treatment chemicals, sometimes those are a type of chemical that you wouldn't want to have spilled on the ground. So putting them in some sort of secondary containment, it might be a diked area that's made out of concrete, or it might even be, they have these, they're called spill pallets, where it's an elevated pallet and it's got a grate on top, and you can set the chemicals on top of that, and then it's got like a catchment underneath it, where if the chemicals were leaking, then they would leak down into this catchment and not out onto the ground. Any kind of transfer that you're doing within the wellhead area should be done over some sort of a catchment or a containment area so that you're capturing those spills and not letting them spread out over the ground. So yes, I think that if you do, one other is with your generators. Sometimes your generators have diesel fuel or some sort of fuel that you don't want those to spill. So your generators should also have some sort of secondary containment to catch leaks, and when they're filling those generators, to make sure that maybe there's spill material nearby, so that when that transfer is happening, that you're prepared to collect the spill.
John wants to know if we can send him a copy of the presentation afterwards.
Yes, if you want to email me and you do want a copy of the presentation, I can send that to you. However, we're going to be sending out an email to everyone afterwards. We did record this webinar, and it can be viewed again later. So if you do have any employees who you want to share this with or who couldn't attend, that the entire webinar is going to be available online to view it at a later time. So you can either view it, or if you think that you do want the presentation, go ahead and email me, and I'd be happy to send it to you.
And that webinar, the posting, it'll probably be tomorrow, so I will send out an email tomorrow to everyone, hopefully, so that you can have a copy of it. Randall wants to know how you can determine if your well is confined or unconfined.
That's a very good question. It should be in your delineation report. So go back to your wellhead protection delineation plan, and there should be information in that plan about your aquifer. It will describe what type of aquifer you're pulling out of and whether it is a confined or an unconfined aquifer.
And Amy's just commenting, I think, on a question that was asked earlier, and she was saying that spill reporting is regulated by the Indiana spill rule. If there is an oil sheen on a waterway, then it is reportable.
Good. Thank you, Amy, for that information.
Another question is, what does utility need to do if contamination happens within 5-year time of travel?
Can you repeat that question once more, Kathy?
Sure. What does a utility need to do if contamination happens within 5-year time of travel?
Well, if the soil is impacted, you want the spill to be completely cleaned up. You want to any liquid should be absorbed. Any soil or rock that's impacted should be removed until you get down to clean soil and clean rock. And so that's kind of what you want to do with cleaning up a spill. But if it has actually affected your drinking water system, obviously you need to take steps to isolate that contamination. I hope that answers your question.
I'm sorry, was that it, Mary? Okay, yes. John wants to know if a notification network for state and federal highways, railroads, etc., to notify of spills that might impact 5 or 10-year time of travels for local utilities.
Yes, that is a very good question. Was that about railroads or like in that, like highways? Was that the question?
It says John wants to know if a notification network, maybe is there a notification network for state and federal highways, railroads, etc., to notify them of spills that might impact 5 or 10-year time of travel for local utilities?
I'm not aware of a communication network, but from our experience, we've tried to, with some of the communities that we've worked with on wellhead protection, we've tried to contact like the local highway departments, local, county highway, and then even the local NDOT areas. They have like their district offices, and then even the railroads. If there's a local railroad office or even their main company office, to send them a notification and say, this is our wellhead area. You're located in this area. Please, contact us if there's a spill or any kind of a contamination that happens along your railroad or in your roadways. And I know that NDOT in Indiana has tried to become real cognizant of that situation. I think enough of maybe the communities have contacted them, or whether IDEM has talked to them specifically, but I know that they try to look at wellhead protection areas when they're doing their road projects. So I think that it's kind of getting incorporated, but trying to contact local people and make them aware, I think, is your best course of action.
Mary, I'm going to limit it to 2 more questions. One is, it's called wellhead protection, but how much control do we have in the activity in those areas?
As I mentioned previously, a lot of it is based on local ordinances or local control. So, work with your local elected officials, town councils, city councils, or your county commissioners, to see if there is anything that can be implemented to help control the issues that you're having within your wellhead area. And I did mention that there are some regulations through underground storage tanks and landfills and some other regulations that do touch on wellhead protection, but really the control is more local. And every wellhead protection area is different, and everyone has different concerns, with industries or transportation routes. So they kind of give you the flexibility to deal with it on your own. But I think that local control and local ordinances is one of the best ways to try to enforce it.
Okay, and the last question is, suppose we construct a well, then after how many years do we need to clean the well?
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure that that's my area of expertise. If you want to send me an email, we do have other engineers who are in our drinking water group that I'm positive that they can help answer those questions. So if you want to contact me specifically, and I can help get that question answered for you.
Sounds great. Thanks for all the questions, and we will be posting the video to our website soon, and actually we'll be sending it out to you hopefully tomorrow via our blog. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great day.